Great. So welcome to Stand Out with Styling and Animation in your XAML app. Yet another in the series of long titles for the Build event. And today I'm your host, John Papa. So this talk, first of all, I want to start with a little bit about what we're going to go over, talk about kind of my background on the Windows team, what I do, and kind of give you an idea of what you can expect out of this particular session, including some things that might look a little familiar and some things that may not look so familiar as well, to help you build really good styling and animation in your XAML apps using the Metro style. So first, my name's John Papa. I've got my Twitter handle up there if you guys ever want to contact. We're also looking for a lot of feedback from these sessions, which I'll provide an email at the end, which you can send to our team as well. And I'm going to ask you to, if you have any questions and we don't have time, then I'll just hang around after the session and we can do that either here or in the hallway, depending upon where time allows. There's also an Ask the Experts tomorrow night. I believe it's tomorrow night at 5:30, which we'll be at. Some of you may recognize me from different things. I write a lot of articles for MSDN Mag, from Visual Studio Magazine. I've got a column as well. I do a series called Silverlight TV, which is weekly on Channel 9. So I've been around to do a lot of different things, client stack for Microsoft lately. I've also done a lot of server-side stuff with Entity Framework and SQL Server and XAML and XML. Kind of hit the whole gambit of things. And one thing I really like to do is I like to show practical examples of how to do stuff. So today's session is going to go over how to deal with the styling and animation in the Metro style apps, using some skills that you have, but then also showing you kind of tips and tricks on things you should or shouldn't do along the way, too. So first, we'll start you off with the slide you probably all saw in the keynote. And this stack here, we're talking about the green bars, basically, the Metro style apps. I'll be showing all the XAML stuff today, so if you're not here for the XAML talk, then you're in the wrong room. But I'll be talking about the XAML side, and specifically we'll be showing C# in this particular stack. Everything runs off of the WinRT, so these APIs. So a lot of what you can see here, you'll also be able to do the same things using the HTML5 web stack that we have as well. So on the agenda here, we're going to talk about the Windows 8 personality and what you get out of the box. You get quite a bit out of the box, actually, which is nice. I am not an expert at creating complex storyboards, yet I can do quite a bit through Metro style with Windows 8. There's a lot that comes out of the box that just, right out of the gate, as soon as you open up the project and you put a template in place, you're going to get a lot. It's built into the system, it's built into Windows, it's built into the controls. And that's a really important thing to remember, and I'll show you how and what this means. I'll talk a little bit about different ways you can style your application too, using light or dark. We'll talk about accessibility. We also have an accessibility chalk talk, which I'll point you to as well for more details. And I'm going to spend a little time on control styling. And this is the area where there's some of this is a little familiar if you've done XAML programming, and some of it's a little new too, so keep an eye on that part. We'll talk about styling controls, properties, using templates, and Visual State Manager. And then we're going to spend a lot of time on animations, which is, the concept of animations isn't new, but the way it's implemented is very powerful, very fast, and really easy to use, which is really nice. And the whole concept of the animations and the styling in this session is to show you how with your applications, you can build these and build your own branding and your own style and make it look seamless like all the other Windows 8 apps. So you don't have to worry about what kind of easing do I use here, what's the duration of this one, or should I use an opacity, or what kind of transform should I use? A lot of that stuff is really easy to figure out once you get through this. And then we also got a couple other concepts I'll bring up along the way and some tips and tricks. When you're out of here, you'll be able to go back and look at the samples. Most of these samples are in the SDK that you guys have access to, and I'll point to what they are. And in some cases, I'll be just showing you the SDKs and showing you the code. In other cases, I'll actually be changing what the SDKs do to show you some differences. So right out of the box, Windows 8 personality, what do you get? Let's jump into a demo. So you've probably all seen by now, if you've been through the XAML sessions today, the Memories app. This is an application written by the team where basically you get some nice animations through scrolling here. You can see the easings go into place, very nice and easy. You'll also see some custom animations here. Notice when I click on this particular photo album, a couple different animations happen. First, you're seeing a duration of different animations. Second, if I go back, you're going to see here that the gray bar moves up and then over. So there's a translate happening here. That gray bar at the bottom is going to go up and to the right. Oops. Now it's going to go up and to the right. You're also seeing an opacity animation coming into place and some easings. So you've got some translates, some opacity, some easings all in there, nice and easy to go. The other thing you're noticing here besides the animations is you're noticing that there's a pretty common paradigm of navigation. So right now I'm inside of this particular album. When I want to go back, I'm clicking on the button in the upper left, the memories bar. This is a common theme if you want to use navigation in your app for two real good places to put it. One is in the upper left, where you may have like a back button, or in this case, it's just the title memories. And that's going to bring me back to my beginning page. The other one is if you have an app bar in your application, you can also put it down here, usually on the far left, to have like some kind of a back button or an arrow with an icon. In this particular case, we don't have that. We have it with the memories bar on the upper right. So some common themes you're going to see. The other thing you'll see in here is when I select an album, and I want to select a photo. Let's pick this one here. Looks good. Oops. I want to pick an album and pick a photo. You'll notice some animations in the app bar as well. Those are popping with opacities and translates too. So here we got this particular photo. I've selected him, and I could remove it, I could change it, or let's say I want to add a page. So I'm going to add a page. We'll use this particular template. And you'll notice the different animations going along here with the app bar. Now we're working with the files. I'm going to choose a photo that hopefully it's a good one, because I didn't take it. And I've got this photo over here, and I can add text to what I want. But let's just say, I'm done with that. Now let's reorder these. Now over here is my photo, but let's say I don't want it to be there. Notice here, when I drag, oops, I'm having problems with my fingers. Windows 8 is fine. My fingers are broken. So here we go with a reorder animation. Notice I dragged the photo from the left over to the right. This is using the grid view control. The grid view control is a new control for Windows 8. And this control is going to be native to the operating system, and it's going to give you a lot of animations out of the box. To learn more about the grid view control, the next session by Hamid is going to be here right following mine, and he's going to go into more depth on grid view and list view and some of the other controls. But this particular one here, you notice when you do a reorder, moving around, it's going to automatically put some animations in there. You see opacity, translate, and easings, and some others all tied into that. So pretty easy to do. We can also select a photo and delete it. That's using an add-delete animation. I'm going to show you how to use the reorder, the reposition, entrance, and the add-delete animations in this particular talk. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Excuse me. First, we're going to start off with some of the features that you have, and we've got a couple sections in this session on project templates and app styling. So before you begin your project, you're probably going to have an idea of what kind of an app it's going to be. And for your app, you might want to say, well, this is going to be a media app, or this is going to be a text-based app. And based upon that, you might want to use maybe dark colors or light colors, so some kind of dark styling or light styling. Out of the box, you get the dark styling automatically using the resource dictionaries. So it's very familiar if you've been a XAML developer. You also can use these project templates that I know you've seen through the keynotes as well. The grid one, for example, which gives you a grid view. And if you want to use one of the styles, what really happens inside of Visual Studio is you're getting a resource dictionary built in, generic XAML, which styles all the controls for you for the dark, let's call it a theme. So you've got this basically a resource dictionary called generic.xaml, which has all the implicit styles built in for all the controls. Now, that's great if you want to do like a photo or video or some kind of media application. But if you wanted to do something a little more text-based, you could use the light styling. To do that, you could grab the light generic XAML, which the best place to get it right now off the top of my head is in the SDK. There's actually an SDK for light and dark themes, and you can grab that XAML file right there. And you can bring that into your project pretty easily. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So first, what you want to do to switch to the light styling, because you get the dark by default, is you want to pull in the light generic XAML as a resource dictionary. So all you're doing is you're adding this file, this reference, into your app XAML. And the easiest way to do that, honestly, is to drag it from Windows Explorer right into your project. It's going to add that line of code for you. You can flip over to the app XAML, and it'll show you where that actually drags it in. And then all of your styling is built into that light generic. It's all using implicit style, so all your controls will automatically be styled. This styles your controls. It won't style any custom controls because it won't know what those are because you've created them. It won't style any panels, but it will style the controls for you. And it's pretty easy to do. So let's go ahead and demo and show how this works. I'm looking for the demo, and I'm just going to do File New. So let's create a new Visual Studio project. App 1 sounds good. We'll use the application. And here you can see the other templates that you get. You notice I'm using the C#. And as this project opens up, I'm just going to go over to my toolbox, and I'm going to add some things onto the designer, like a button. So here we've got a button. Really, we do. Oh, awesome. So we're going to drag a button, and we'll stick a checkbox and a combo box over here, too. Let's scroll down to the XAML, make sure I got what I needed. I don't think the button made it. There we go. There's a button. Let's stick a checkbox over here, and we'll just do those two guys. So right now you can see the dark style is in place. There is no generic XAML pointed to. It's all built into the project. Now if I run this, you're going to see it look the same way it does right here. But let's do something different. Let's open up Windows Explorer, and notice I happen to have a light generic XAML right here. How handy. If you drag that into your project, oops, you'll notice it opened up App XAML for me. And over here in App XAML, it added in this line of code. So here it put in the light generic XAML. Oops. And I'm keyboard illiterate there. Let's go. So I added in my light generic XAML. And now over to my main page, I haven't saved it or changed anything yet. The one thing it's not going to change for me is going to be the background at this point. So I'm going to change that to white. All the controls will automatically change the styling once you compile and build. And when I run this, it should automatically pick up the white background, and all the controls, in this case the button and the checkbox, use that new styling for you. So out of the box, you get that Metro style built in. Pretty easy to do. And if you want to take it back out, you can either remove this file, or you can simply come in here and just remove the resource dictionary that you added in. Cool. So in summary real quick, you're going to get that Windows 8 personality out of the box with a lot of what you get with the controls. So if you use a grid view or a list view, and again, you'll see more about that in the next session, you're going to get a lot of these animations built in, and a lot of these themes of the Metro style. The project template's a great starting point instead of doing a blank application like I happen to choose, and you can use light and dark styles really easily. So we're talking a lot about styling, so we need a baseline for how to style your apps. So let's talk about control styling in general. And one good way to do this, too, and I really encourage you to do this, is to open up the generic XAML and look through how some of those controls are styled already for the Metro style, so you can see what they're doing. So if you want to get some ideas on different styling, or if you want to create your own styles, you can do that too. So if you're familiar with XAML, and you've done styling before, some of this will be very much of a review for you, and I won't go through it too deep. But basically in styling, you're going to get all your controls. You can break them down into basically properties, like what's the background color, the foreground color. What's the template? You can redefine what your control looks like completely. So a button doesn't have to look like a button, for example. Or you can add behavior to it through visual states in the Visual State Manager. And all this can be done through Visual Studio, and we'll show these here. The first step is understanding the different kinds of styles you can have. You can have explicit styles, which really are keyed styles. You create a style, you give it a key name, and this is great for a control that has to look different than all the others. So all your buttons in your app should look relatively the same, but you might have one button you want to stand out and look differently. In that case, you might want to apply a keyed style to it. Pretty easy to do. A based on style is basically another keyed style that you can inherit from an explicitly keyed style. So you might have a base button that you use, and then all the others might inherit from that and have a different style for it. I'll show you an example for that. And then there's implicit styles, which is what the generic XAML uses, and you can also use to basically say all the buttons in my app need to look this way, or all the list boxes need to look that way. So in an explicit or based on style, here we've got a keyed style. It's explicitly defined, where I'm going to set the margin to 12, and the foreground is going to be this shade of blue. And that's what it's going to look like. The button's going to change slightly. And now I've got a based on style. Notice this one here, it looks the same as far as the syntax. It still has target type of button. The key is a different key name, but I'm basing it upon a previous keyed style. And you'll see that in the green box there. In this case, it's going to inherit everything, including the margins and the foreground color of the first button style, and then it's going to override the font size in the foreground In this case, it's going to take the blue, throw it away, and put the yellow in there, and it's going to increase the font size. So it's pretty easy to do these explicit and based on styles. Implicit, you basically just remove the key, and they're not based on anything in this case. In this case, I'm just doing an implicit style. It's a button. I'm going to set a bunch of formats for it. And there's no key specified. Pretty easy to implement. So styling's pretty easy. What about templating? What if you don't want your button to look like a button? What if you want it to look completely different than the out-of-the-box button? You want to do something more than just change the foreground or fonts or other margin properties. You can do that too. So you want to keep with the Metro style look and feel, but you might want to change other aspects to let your brand come through in this. So you can do this through the properties, which we just showed through some of the styles, or templates or visual states. So the templates are kind of like the content. What's your button going to look like? What's your list box? So this is a good styling analogy that a friend of mine, Tim Hewer, mentioned to me, which I kind of liked, is styling's like painting the wall blue. You got a wall, you're going to paint it blue. But templating, the concept of that is like making the wall a window. It's still a wall, but it kind of looks like a window now. So you're really just changing the entire appearance of how this control is going to be. So here we've got a series of buttons that were actually styled, which are similar to the Sudoku app, for those of you who have the tablet. And here's another button, which could be completely rewritten as well, where you've got like a circle, the whole border is gone, the rectangle, the custom template's gone, and we've got an arrow in there. And we've got some different opacities set. So that gives us to properties and templating. What about behavior with visual states? The Visual State Manager is going to allow you to change the behavior of your app. This is where you can change things with transforms, like somebody hovers over a button or presses it, what's going to happen? Somebody's scrolling through a scroll bar, how should a different appearance change? You can change the appearance, you can use transforms, you can add easings into place. You can use, keyframes or other animations as well. So here we've got like the same buttons we saw previously in a visual state I created called normal. Here's one with a press state where the button turns orange, and you notice the inverse color for the A. The foreground color turns white. And we've got like a hover state as well. And these are just names I made up for my visual states. You can call them, Mo, Larry, and Curly if you want to. So the way you do visual states and styles here, we've got a more complex style for a button. And you'll see inside of the control template, because we're templating this button, which we're changing the appearance, we're also adding in the Visual State Manager some state groups. So because the code didn't fit here, to show real quick, this is the Visual State Manager for that button. You notice there's a mouse over state. And the mouse over state's got basically an animation for the color. And it has a duration of 0. So it's instantly going to change from color X to Y. Really easy to do. And before we jump into the demo, one last thing I want to point to. There's an accessibility chalk talk. There's a lot of the theming and coloring. You can use 2 additional features which are really cool. If you apply high contrast mode, which you can do through the ease of access window here, I put a clip shot of. If you go to high contrast mode, you can take advantage of a concept called themed dictionaries. These are a different kind of a resource dictionary, not a merged dictionary, but a themed dictionary. The themed dictionary allows you to basically apply different sets of styles based upon the high contrast theme that the user selected for their Windows PC. And you can do that really easily. And I've got some in my appendix of this talk. I have some slides that I hid that you can grab and shows you the code to actually implement that. You can also use the system colors as well. There's a whole series of system colors that are in the SDK that you can check out. So you can apply system colors too when you're in that high contrast mode. If you have you want more information about this, we've got some great demos in the SDK, and we also have an accessibility chalk talk, I believe, on Friday that Ulner is doing. So let's do a quick demo. Or let's not do a quick demo, let's just do a demo. So I've got 2 demos here. One is on basic styling with some buttons. Here you'll see inside the designer, I've got a series of 9 buttons. The top set of buttons are using the style that I created. It's a keyed style that we saw on the slide. The middle set is using another keyed style that's using based on the first one. And the ones at the bottom are using an implicit style. So when I look over here, and we can select the buttons through the document outline. If I go to the styles, here I've got my first style, which is setting that property for the margin of the foreground. The second style is setting it based on the first property. And the third one, notice there is no key. It just says, any other buttons that aren't using a keyed style, go ahead and use this particular style. And they're all in my styles XAML. And then I've got those styles hooked up through a resource dictionary in my app XAML. And when I run my project, we should see the different buttons in place. Here you're getting the default states for these buttons with the hover and the press. And down here you can see the visual states we set up earlier coming into play with no click event handlers. It's funny, every time I click a button, I expect something to happen. So that's how we style these guys. The next demo is showing you here some templates that we have. So here I've got a project, and let's just run it first. I don't have any resource dictionary. Notice I commented it out. And in this project, I got a bunch of controls. In this case, I have a text box up top. I have a text block with a wrap set, with a wrap property set in the middle. And then I've got two buttons in the bottom. And then the text block is actually inside of a scroll viewer. So you're not seeing a whole lot there until I hover. And now you can see the scroll viewer. And that's the default Metro look and feel. And I can type in hello and take advantage of all that. But let's say I wanted to use some custom styles. Let's uncomment this guy. And let's go look at the styles that I have here. First, I've got a text block style in my resource dictionary. And let's make that smaller. And I've also got a scroll bar style. And I've also got, that's a big one. Look how big that guy is. How would you like to type that from scratch? I've also got a scroll viewer style. Notice these are all target types. These are implicit styles. These styles are going to apply to all the controls automatically for me. Now, I have to admit, I didn't type these, and there are 400 lines of code there. I had the advantage of having a designer who was very helpful to me. And now by putting this in place, you're going to see you got like a squiggly line around the scroll viewer that's going on there. We've got the different styling for the text box. It's more like a hand-drawn style. For the buttons, we've got that as well, and the scroll viewer. So it all has a little bit different look and feel. The control looks very, very different. The way this is working is basically not just setting properties. I mean, we can't just change the rectangle that's around a scroll viewer to a hand-drawn rectangle through a property. You have to use a template to do something like that. Perhaps using a path, maybe. So those are the kind of things that you want to use templating for. It shows you how easy you can take something like this, flip over to a style, and apply it. And the XAML for the controls is exactly the same. So here's my XAML for the controls. It's just a grid with a stack panel. It's got a text box, a scroll viewer, and some buttons. Notice there are no styles applied. Nothing. It's all using implicit styling for me. So pretty easy to do. Okay, so we talked a lot about styling here, and a lot of this was a rehash if you did some of the XAML stuff before. If you haven't done visual states and templating before, I encourage you to look more into it because a lot of that will really be helpful, especially when you're doing animations inside of your app. So recap real quick. You want to let your app shine through with the styling and the templating that you get out of the box with the controls. If you need to change something to look differently, you can style them or template them. You can use the visual states to add behavior, which we do quite a bit when we're adding things. It gives it nice little usability features. Nice things like easing and opacity and translations are pretty common to do. And then if you're doing accessibility, you want to check out the theme dictionaries and system colors for the high contrast scenarios too. So all this kind of leads us to animations. Now, animations aren't new. They've been around, but the way you implement them has changed and in a lot of ways become easier and faster and better. So I kind of broke this section up into 4 topics. We're going to talk about the built-in animations that you get for free. You get these out of the box. What are they, how do they work, and what does that mean? And then we'll talk about a concept called the animations library. This is a feature that's built into the Windows 8 controls that allows you to use some of the animations that Windows uses inherently in its controls and in the system in your controls too. So I mentioned before that in the grid view, you get some things for free. You get the animations for free when things are loaded in the grid view. You get those easings and translates and the opacity. What if you wanted to do that with your own control? Well, you can do that. You can easily do that using the animations library. And I'll show you some ways you can do it. We saw earlier in the Memories app how when we added a new page, a new photo, there was an add delete animation that was put in there. That was using the animations library. One line of XAML. One. Really easy to do. It's actually 2 words, I think, too. So pretty easy to do. There's also a way to make your own custom animations. So when times when you need to do something a little different that's not something that you find in the animations library, there's a way to do custom animations. And there's a couple of variations of that, which I'll walk through. And then some tips and tricks on things that are good to do, some things that are maybe something you should reconsider, and how to kind of navigate the animations library. So first, it's important to understand what do you get for free. Controls have built-in animations. I mean, it goes without saying that the OS has the animations built into it, but some of the controls do too, like the application bar. You notice when you swipe up and you get the application bar, you're getting a little bit of an animation as well. The progress ring, that's got some animations built into it. You notice the circles will go in a certain pattern, a certain duration, with certain easing, and they actually move around with a little bit of translate. The toggle switch uses animations when you do a toggling too, so even simple controls. And then the grid view. So the grid view uses a whole series of animations to load its content. And this is from the Memories app. There we go. Did I skip a slide? Nope. So the animations library, this is really cool. When I first started learning about this, I was like, this is really great, because when I've developed apps with XAML in the past, I've always wanted to get those easings and the states into place really easily, and I want it to feel like a seamless experience with the OS. The last thing you want to do, at least the last thing I wanted to do, was create some crazy animation that was really cool to me, but drove the user nuts. Kind of think of it as the modern-day version of a blink tag. You don't want to do that. You know, you want to get animations that really make it nice for the user. They want to keep using it, and they're like, oh, that's cool. You know, and it's subtle but performant, and really gets them interested in the app. So with the animations library, it allows you to pull these things in really, really easily. And it was almost so simple when I first tried it that I was like, there's got to be something more to this. And it's actually so easy, there isn't much more to it. You just pull these animations in really quickly. So what do you get by it? You get the key animations used throughout Windows 8. That's the key. You get really great performance. These are guaranteed to be highly performant. They run on the GPU. They're independent of the CPU, basically. And then you're often going to include things like translation, as I mentioned. You'll have durations that are set to certain intervals, specific easings in some cases. And all that is kind of, think of it like a black box. You don't have to set the easing or the duration or the translation or the opacity. All that's set up for you if you say, all I want is an entrance theme transition. When things come in, I want them to come in the same way they do it throughout all the other apps in Windows. You add that one transition, and it does it. So it's a great way to make your app feel like it's part of Windows. So there's 2 pieces in the animations library that are really important. There's theme transitions. You're going to hear the word theme a lot today. There's theme transitions, and I'm going to show you 5 of them here. There's an entrance transition. Basically, a theme transition, this group here allows you to basically apply it to a particular state, and then whenever your control does this action, it does an entrance. So when your control enters in this case, or your panel, it's going to use a staggering with a little bit of fading while it moves in these new elements. And you'll see this throughout all of the Windows 8 apps. So if you want to add it to some other control you create, you add an entrance theme transition. The entrance theme only happens when it enters, not when you're moving things around. So a content theme transition will fade out old contents and fade in new contents. So let's say you're toggling through different content in a frame or some other content control. And you want to fade out content, fade new ones in, use translation and easings the way Windows does. You pop in a content theme transition, and it's going to do that for you. A reposition. You'll see that in the case where I moved one item, one photo from one place to another in the Memories app. That was using a reposition theme transition. It said, oh, my control knows that it's doing some kind of repositioning. I'm going to use this transition to move from point A to point B. And it fluidly moves that elements around from some kind of an offset. An add-delete transition. We saw this again in the Memories app. These are built into things like the grid view and list view, which again, you can see the next session to get more detail on those. But let's say you're not using one of those controls and you want to have some kind of an add-delete, like on a stack panel. You can add an add-delete theme transition. So anytime an item is added or deleted from that control, it will actually do a fade in, fade out, and move existing items in and around. Very nice. And finally, you've got like a reordering as well, which is also built into the grid view and list view for you. Now, you can combine some of these into some controls where they make sense. In other cases, they won't make sense in some controls. Like you wouldn't want to put an add delete on a button control, for example. You're not adding or deleting anything inside the button. So you can add more than one of these to particular controls where they make sense. My suggestion is to try the ones that kind of feel most natural. So how do you add this in code? Really easy to do. You got a grid. It's a panel. Everybody's got a grid in their app, right? You got a grid or a stack panel. There's a new property here called child transitions. And in there, you can create a transition collection where you can stick one or more of these animation library theme transitions in. In this case, I added an entrance theme transition. I said it was 2 words. I lied. It's 1 word. You stick it in there and you're done. You can also, on some of them, have different properties. Like if you wanted to override specific aspects of a transition, there are some properties available to allow you to do that. In this case, you can have an offset, like a horizontal offset of 500. If you don't specify that, that's optional. It'll use whatever the default is for the animations libraries. So imagine trying to do that in previous XAML technologies, how much code it would take. And actually, one of my demos will show you how much this saves. It's really nice. So I talked about theme transitions. This is now theme animations. They're all part of the animations library. Theme transitions, think of those again like there's an action that's going to happen. I know what that action is. I want something to happen now. Theme animations are, I might have some custom action, maybe a visual state I've created, like hover or mouse over. Or maybe I have some other storyboard I've created. We still have storyboards. Want to create a storyboard and put some kind of animation in there? We can use theme animations for that. The big difference is between the theme animations and the theme transitions is theme animations, you must begin, stop, pause, or resume them. They don't just happen. You have to tell them when to happen. So you either have to say, start my theme transition storyboard, or you can put it inside like a visual state manager, and whenever that state gets fired, it'll do it. Now, there's a whole series of them here, and I'm sure I've missed a couple. But basically, these are the key ones. You got reposition, so you can do a reposition animation, which we talked about. It's very similar to the transition. Pop in and pop out. I'll show you that one in one of the demos. You can do this, and you can see this in like the dialogues and the flyouts and the context menus that are built into Windows. Again, a lot of these come right out of the Windows OS. Fade in and fade out. Similar to pop in and pop out, but think of the pop in, pop out as kind of a quick one. And the fade in is kind of, it just appears slowly, it does an opacity, and it's got a little bit of a easing on it. Tap up, tap down, split open and close. We've got a whole bunch, so dragging and dropping. So how do you set these up? There's 2 places that you can put these in. Let's say you've got a storyboard. In this case, I got a storyboard called My Storyboard. In this case, it's inside of a stack panel. It could be anywhere in your resource dictionary, though. I got a storyboard here, and instead of creating a fade-out theme animation by hand, which I could have done in previous technologies, I could have gone out there and said, well, I wanted to fade out, so I've got to do some kind of opacity, maybe an easing, do the duration for like 0.4 seconds. Oh, that wasn't good. I'll do 0.3, change it around. Now I'm going to say, add a fade-out theme animation, and I set the target name to the element that I want this to apply to. Very, very easy to do. So in this case, I've got my target name of my element, which you can see down there below is the name of the element. I think I've already got a bug in here. I hope I didn't do a bug. Let's see. Nope, I did it. Cool. So in this case, I've got a rectangle tapped event. And when I actually tap this from the rectangle, it's going to say myStoryboard.begin. So I have to, with the animations, I have to fire them off, because in this case I've got a storyboard. So I say myStoryboard.begin, it's going to go off and do that. And you could have like the repeat setting on, so you want it to repeat, which you wouldn't in this case. But you could set the repeat up, or the durations, and you can override some of those properties. Pretty easy to do. This is for like a custom animation when you do something. But let's say you're using visual states like we talked about earlier. So here we could have a visual state which has got a theme animation called split open theme animation. This is actually the one of the generic XAML for the combo box. This is the theme animation used for the controls when you use the ones that come out with Windows. So you can actually check this code out. There's a split open theme animation, which is what happens when you have the combo box and you open up the dropdown. It's doing here, what's the target? It's the pop-up order. What's the content target? When you close it, what's that one? What's the offset for the translation? And it's got easings and durations all set in there as well. So you can drop one of these guys in pretty easily. So that's the first kind of animation, the animations library. What if you want to do something a little more advanced where there's no built-in animation and you can't really customize it? First, I would highly encourage you to use the built-in animations library. It's easy, one line of code. Put it in there, and it's not just that it's one line of code, it makes your user's experience the same and fluid as it is through the Metro style apps that are already built in. So you're going to get that same experience. But if you need to change something, you can do custom animations. Excuse me. So custom animations, this is where you've got to choose, do you want to do dependent animations or independent animations? And what these basically mean are the independent ones are the fast ones, the ones that run on the GPU. They're the ones just like the animations library, which are guaranteed to be very, very performant. So when you're doing things like, currently, in the Windows Developer Preview, things like double animation for opacity and transforms. Transforms being things like the translate, or the rotation, or the skew. If you want to do one of those, that's going to be independent. It's going to run on the GPU. Why is that important? Because by running on the GPU, it's not changing the user experience depending upon what the processor and how taxed the CPU is. So it's very important to use the independent ones. You can also do anything that's got a duration of 0 is going to be independent as well. Why? Because the duration of 0 basically means you're not really animating it, you're just toggling from one state to the other. So it's not re-rendering the layout. Or if you're doing like object keyframes, it's kind of the same philosophy. You're going at specific keyframes to pop things in and out. So anything that's independent will work greatly for it. What is dependent? Basically, any other custom animation you create, like a color animation, will be dependent. And that means it's dependent on the UI thread. It's going to run on the UI thread. How fast is it going to be? It depends. That's why it's dependent. It depends on your CPU and how taxed it is at the time. So to do this, you must specifically enable them. If you want to use a dependent one, because we don't want the user experiences to be poor, we want them to be very great and rich, we want you to use the animations library, the independent animations. But if you want to enable a dependent animation for a specific case, inside of that specific animation, you must turn on the property called allow dependent animation and set that to true. That'll allow you to do it and basically say, yep, I understand this is going to be a dependent animation. If you want more information on that, there's examples in the SDK that show you how to do that. I'm not going to concentrate on the dependent. I'm going to show you more about the independent. So we talked about a lot with animation, and we've got a bunch of demos to go through. So I want to kind of show what those tips are that I kind of mentioned along the way. First, you want to use the animations built into the controls, which is easy. You just drag the grid view on or one of those controls, and you get the animations out of the box, or progress ring. Those are fast. For consistent experience performance, when you need to add an animation of your own, you want to pull in one of these theme transitions or theme animations from the animations library. They are all independent. And then for any custom animations where you just can't get what you want built into the controls, or you can't get what you want through animations library, you want to build a custom animation using independent animations, which we showed some of those there with like the double animations. And what's the major advantage? Again, you get that Metro-style consistency. Requires a lot less code than a custom animation, which you'll see in one of the demos. And they're likely to be more performant than a custom animation. I never say the words always or never, but they're likely to be more performant. So let's take a look at some demos here. I'll hydrate myself. So there's a lot of animations demos in the SDK. In fact, I think there's two that are named animations. One's called animations, the other one's called personality animations. And I'm not going to show you all of them, but the ones I'm going to show you, first I wrote one of my own, but if you want to take a look at custom animations with independent really deeply, there's a SDK sample called Animations. It's in the SDK, and it'll show you a lot about that. This one here, let's say we've got this main page, and let's just run this for a sec. I've got a stack panel, and on it I've got a button that says toggle the red one. Basically, my stack panel's got 5 rectangles in it. One of them's a red rectangle. And all I want to do is when I click my button, I want the red rectangle to disappear and then to reappear. So I look at the panel on the left here. Now when I toggle this, there's no animations on this left pane. I'm popping it in and popping it out. There's no animation, no easing, no duration. You know, the experience is very, very raw. And when you look at the code for this, you can see I don't have anything set up in my stack panel. It's just a bunch of rectangles. And then when I click over to my code, you'll see my wonderful code here for button click, where I'm basically just toggling the visibility. Well, I've got buttons for the other stack panels too. And we'll take a look at those. And let's go ahead and move that guy over. Let's scroll here. He seems to be collapsed. That's not good. You're not going to see it if it's collapsed, will you? You will all laugh. So here we've got the same set of rectangles. This one here has a rectangle transitions collection, reposition theme transition. I've added to the yellow box, just to the yellow rectangle. When this guy knows he's moved, when he's repositioned, he's going to use this animations library for us. So that's the second column. Let's take a look at what happens when I run him. So here I still have, in the first column, I'm popping it in and out. Notice that animation. And the second one, I'm putting the reposition animation on just the yellow rectangle. I'm still removing the red one, but watch the yellow guy. Two things are happening here that are really important. One is that the yellow rectangle, or square, is actually using the animations library. So it's using that built-in animation. The other thing that's important is it's not working for the blue or the purple. Well, what if I've got some kind of control where I could dynamically add different squares to this? Maybe it's a game or something else. I don't want to have to figure out how many of these elements do I have and add that line of XAML to every element. Probably wouldn't be very convenient. So the other thing I can do is I can add a reposition animation on the stack panel. So if I go down to my third element, you'll notice here, again, I'll make this a little bigger. Inside the stack panel, I've added the same kind of reposition theme transition, but this time to everything inside the stack panel. The only difference here is it's on the stack panel level instead of the rectangle. The other difference is that it's a stack panel children transitions, whereas the one above it, it's a rectangle transitions. This one's children transitions because it applies to everything inside the stack panel, not to the stack panel itself. And there's no magic on these rectangles. They're just a bunch of properties. So flipping back to the app, again, here we get pop in and pop out. Here we get the yellow guy who's kind of moving nicely. And then over here, notice they're all moving along. Very, very simple to do. So as a second example, this is a similar demo. You can tell I like my colors and rectangles. Let's say I wanted to add different kinds of transitions. I mentioned there were 5 of them that were really kind of important. One we talked about already with the reposition. In this case, let's select an add-delete transition. And now let's add an item. You notice how the opacity is changing over duration with a slight easing in there? There's no translation in this case, but it's pulling them in. Now when I delete an item randomly, notice the delete uses that animation. If I clear the transition and I add an item, notice how they just pop in at the bottom. So let's say I clear these transitions, and now let's do something like entrance won't work in this case because they were already entered. So I apply an entrance transition. There's nothing to enter. But that's what happens when they first come on. We've already seen the repositioning. Let's go ahead and do a reorder transition. And let's do swapping of content. And notice here, as I'm doing it, the top square is moving off to the right. And then the one on the right is moving up to the bottom there. So I can do this, and we can play a little game. Watch the yellow square. So we can move that guy around pretty easily. And then we can also do the moving the first to last. Let's say we do like a reorder. We can do a move first to last. And you can see here the top moves to the bottom. If I take that guy off, oops, clear my transitions, now you're noticing they're just popping in. It's quite a different experience when you're not using these theme transitions. All right. So those are 2 that I built pretty quickly. Now, the third one I want to show is actually part of the SDK. Now, in the SDK, there's 3 scenarios for the personality animations. And we're going to walk through each one of these and change something about them, kind of show you how these things work. So the first one is using a pop-in animation on this square. So when I run this animation, what's happening is basically I've got a pop-in theme animation that's going to automatically apply when I click this button. Pretty easy, pretty simple. Let's take a look at how this works. Got my handy-dandy bookmarks. Now first you'll see there's a pop-in theme animation, which I've got. It's set to a storyboard target name of fade-out target element, and it's using the horizontal offset, which I don't have to apply the offset. We could get rid of that. But let's say I don't like the pop-in. What I could do is I could take this out of here, and let's comment him out, and let's add in a fade-out theme transition instead. Now, unlike the pop-out, which you can run over and over again because it'll keep popping in, the fade-out is going out, so once I click it, it's going to fade away, and it's not coming back. So I can click it again, but it ain't going to happen. But you notice the animation is there, it applies. It wouldn't make sense to have both of those. In fact, if I applied both, I'd get an error. It would tell me, look, you can't have two animations applied to the same target name in the storyboard, or something like that. Otherwise, John Papa will come to your house and beat you up. So how does it actually apply? Because that's a storyboard. When I click the button, you'll notice storyboard.begin. Very simple. And again, you can set the repeat behavior, repeat forever, all that other fun stuff with storyboards. Pretty easy to do. Okay, so let's run the second scenario. In the second scenario in the SDK, well, the first one, let's go back real quick. The first one, we're running a pop-in theme animation, which we're using through a storyboard. So we're telling it when to start and stop. The second one, we're doing a content transition. In this case, I've got a control on the left, and when I select this guy, you'll notice that the content over here on the right-hand side, that's my right, right? Yeah. Content on my right-hand side is actually kind of sliding into place. What's happening is there's a content control. It's just a regular content control with a bunch of stuff in it. It's got my images and whatnot, and they're actually sliding into place. They're using a translation, some kind of opacity, and an easing and a duration. I don't know what they happen to be. I don't care. This is the one that's built in with the animations library. So what I could do to take a look at this is first we could say, well, what if we wanted to get rid of that and see what happens? First, everything inside the SDK is inside of this frame. The frame is the bottom section where the output is. So I could go look there and see inside generic XAML, are there any particular transitions in that frame? These particular transitions were built in. I could add like an entrance theme transition if I wanted to the content. I got a little note there just to remind myself and you all that if I added this in here, this entrance theme transition, it's only going to work the first time everything loads because that's an entrance. What I want is anytime the content changes, I want the transition to apply. So in this case, this is not the effect I want. If we had time, we could play with that one. What I really want is back in my page, not the frame, but the page that's loading the content. I've got this content control. And it's got a data template with my image in it, and you can see that here. Inside that content control, further down, you'll see I've got a content control content transition, and I've got a content theme transition inside of it. This is what's applying that particular theme transition. So let's get rid of it. Best way to learn this stuff is to just make it go away. So here we've got no content theme transition now. So when I run this app, I select the second example. Before, when I clicked on these elements, we had a nice content theme transition. Now they're just popping in and out. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not giving the same experience. So we could pop it back in there, and let's say we didn't really notice what was happening earlier because it was kind of a slight offset. We could add in like a horizontal offset of like 500. So now I've got a content theme transition. I've set my offset on there. We're going to run the app. And when I select on it, you notice they're really coming in from far from the right and sliding into place. Again, I don't have to worry about playing with the durations or easings or any of the keyframes or any of that. It's all built in and out of the box. Think of it like a black box, a good black box. The third scenario is a little more complex, and this is kind of where I think the real value comes really more apparent for me. When I was going through this, I was like, well, a lot of times, you know, those kind of animations are nice in certain places, but the way I used to do it, I always think about what did I used to do with XAML. I used to write a lot of XAML code with visual states and storyboards to get things looking the way I wanted to. So I've already seen that now I don't have to tinker with a lot of the properties. I can get those out of the box, the animations library. But how do I reduce code, get better maintainability as well? So let's see this example where we're transitioning between two pages. Here I'm clicking on one page, and then I'm loading to page 2. What's happening is I've got a frame at the bottom. The output is a frame. And I'm loading two separate pages, page 1 and page 2. Inside of page 1 and page 2, I have 3 controls. I've got a text block here and there, and then I've got a grid view. So I've got all these guys in there. I go to page 1 and page 2. Notice a couple subtleties. The text blocks and the grid view are sliding into place. You can see how they're all kind of starting at an offset and sliding to their left. Let's go back to the code. Let's say we want to tinker with this and see it's actually working. Well, the way this was written, and on purpose here, it's using the Visual State Manager. So starting here on line 21, I've got a bunch of states. It says navigate to the storyboard. And these states are using double animations. There's easings. They're all using ease out. And they're sliding down here, and we can see the visual states end down here. Not too much in there, but I've got an exponential ease in some cases. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff I could be doing in this case. Now, because I'm using the easing in there, and I'm doing other translation things, I'm also using a translate transform, which I have to define the offset for. So in every element, the text block that I have here, the second text block, and then here, my grid view in the items panel, I've got different transforms set up. So there's 9 lines of XAML that I'm using in this case for each of those transforms, and I think there was something like 42 lines of XAML for the Visual State Manager. So about 50 lines. Now, you'd have to figure out, how much of that do you want to do, how much don't you want to do. Let's say we don't want the visual states. We could comment him out. You come down here, you can comment him out, or we could delete him. I'm not that bold. And we can come down here. Looks like my bookmarks are off a little bit. Did I get him? I did. Now, I've removed all those guys. Let's run it again. Now, this is only in page 1. Page 2 I have not touched. So in page 1, notice the text blocks don't move. Page 2, the text blocks move, and the grid view moves to the left. Excuse me. Now, you might be saying, well, the grid view is still animating, John. Well, you're right. The grid view is animating. But the grid view contents are animating, not the grid view itself. If you wanted it to slide into place, you'll notice the grid view itself is not moving. It's the elements that are moving inside of it. It's a slight subtlety, but actually the translate isn't applying. So there's a slight difference. This one, nothing's popping into place. This one, there is. So how do I add that back? Well, I could put those lines of code back, or I could add these 3 lines of code. Inside my grid view, I want him to slide into place. And then, just to show you a trick here, if you look at the generic XAML for the grid view, one of the neat things you can do is you can come down and you can look and say, well, the grid view itself, the style that it comes out of the box with, has all of these transitions in place. So you're saying, well, what are they using out of the covers? They're using the animations library too. So what I did here is I took the grid view inside page 1, and I added the transition collection to it. And up here, I've got my text blocks and everything else in place. Let's run this guy. I think I pressed run. I click him, and I've got him there, and he's sliding. Now you notice I don't have any animations now for the grid view. So why did that happen? If I come back down to the override, what I actually did is I gave it a transition collection of blank. Generic XAML says you've got these 4 or 5 transitions built out of the box or grid view. I said, I don't want any of them. By the way, I don't recommend this. I'm just showing that you can actually remove the animations by saying, here's a new collection, has nothing in it. So again, quickly, here's the ones you get out of the box in generic XAML, if my scroll bar would work. Yes, not responding. I kind of got that when it wasn't moving. So these are the ones you get out of the box with the grid view. And then what I did is I overrode them by saying, I don't want any of them. Well, I actually do, so we're going to get rid of that guy. And instead, on the entire grid, not the grid view, but the entire grid that holds everything in that output pane, I'm going to apply a children transitions, because I want everything inside the grid to have the transitions. I'm going to use an entrance theme transition. Now watch this. A minute ago, we had nothing on page 1 animating. Only page 2 was. So now, on page 1, notice the text blocks animate and the grid view and all the content in it as well. Page 2. And you'll notice they're the same animations. This one took 3 lines of XAML. This one took like 50 lines of XAML. Much, much easier. So these are pretty easy to go through and look at, and very helpful if you have bookmarks, by the way. So let's get back to the slides. Just a couple topics to kind of go over here. I know the animations, there's a lot to go through, but it's really important to understand that you really should be taking advantage of the built-in animations. We talked about what comes out of the box of the controls, like the grid view. Remember, the grid view gives you those animations out of the box. I actually had to forcibly write code to make them go away, which you don't want to do. And then you want to take advantage of the animations library to get that consistent experience in a really highly performant app. And again, you can use custom animations for those independent animations that I mentioned for advanced scenarios. The 9-grid is another new feature we have for these apps too. And this is really cool. So some of you may know what a 9-grid is. How many here know what a 9-grid is? Quick as hands. A couple people? This is kind of a neat concept. Excuse me. The 9-grid, basically, the way you can think about this is the way to scale images. Let's say you've got some custom assets, like your company has particular assets that they're using for, they want to scale out. Like you want a certain button, for example, or a container, like a border, or a stack panel to look like, to take on the appearance of your particular brand. You can have assets that you can use to actually make that brand shine through with a 9-grid. So what does that mean? Basically, you can use it for buttons and borders and other containers. It preserves the corner details of your images. So like when you're creating a larger border or a smaller border, if you're using an image, now when you zoom in on an image, you get that like pixelated look around the edges. You can make it so that with a 9-grid, it stretches just in the right spots, and in the corners it doesn't. So it keeps that nice, smooth corner appearance. So it stretches and fills the rest. And this can be really important because it can render faster, fast as or faster than vectors in many cases. So this is better than actually drawing things out sometimes. So here's one example that you can do, and I believe this is in the 9-grid SDK sample. I won't show you that one here because it's pretty simple to look at. The code is basically a property inside the image tag. You set 9-grid, and then you set basically using the thickness type. It's a type of thickness. You can say 5858, and it starts in the different quadrants of the image to break it out. So it basically breaks that image, which you can see on the left, which is zoomed in, very pixelated. It breaks it up into basically a tic-tac-toe board. So think of it that way. And then when I scale it, look how smoothly it scales the corners of that particular container. So here's kind of how I thought about it when I first looked at a 9-grid. So think of this as your image. And I broke it down into my little tic-tac-toe board. The green squares are your corners. They're not going to change. The blue parts are the parts that are going to stretch. When I use a 9-grid, I'm going to stretch that middle part out. Notice the greens didn't change, nor did the sides in that case. And then I'm going to stretch the top and the bottom as well. But I can stretch this as big as I want, and my corners will still stay the way they're supposed to stay. Let's take a look at a demo for that. And again, there is an SDK demo, but I'm going to show you another one that one of the guys on the team wrote that I really thought was a little more robust in a lot of ways. So here we've got our images. These are the actual source images, the assets down here, blue, orange, and pink. And then here they are just zoomed in. We just took those same images and we zoomed them in, and you can see how pixelated they are when they're blown up. So these are not high-res images. Very, very small footprints. Now up top, this button is using a 9-grid to lay itself out for the particular button. And you notice the different colors when I hover and I click. It's using each of those images. Let's do this here. Let's take this and let's stretch the width out. And notice the corners don't change. Nice and smooth. So this is going to render a lot faster. Not a lot. It's going to be rendering faster or just as fast as the vectors again. But it's nice and easy to use and take advantage of. And it's just one property. So with that, we can wrap up. We talked about a lot of things, but really you can leverage a lot of the XAML skills you have now If you've done a lot of styling and templating, a lot of that is still there for you, but there's additional features, especially with the animations, and then things like the dark and light styles, really easy to implement. You want to take advantage of that Windows 8 personality out of the box. Pretty easy to do. You use those light and dark styles, the resource dictionaries. You can use the accessibility features, which again, I'll point you to Owner's Accessibility Chalk Talk. I'm not sure if it's Thursday or Friday. You can also take advantage of a lot of the animations libraries, which a lot of that stuff is baked into the grid view and list view and other controls, which you can stick around to see Hamid's talk on. Here's a series of other talks. Hamid's is the one on top. It's the one that's coming up next. A bunch of these other talks, if you hadn't had a chance to see them yet, I highly recommend these. The Tips and Tricks one by Tim Hewer is really good as well. It's got some good learnings along the way that the team had. And some of these examples you saw today, the SDK ones, it's the source for a lot of these samples I had. I changed some of them around as I showed you, but pretty easy to do. There's also an Animations Quick Start. These are active links when you download the deck. You can go check it out. Animations Quick Start goes into depth on a lot of the features I mentioned, including a couple other things as well, and some contact info for myself. Other than that, please, 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 action item, use the animations that we've got built into here, use the controls, and if you've got any feedback, we're really, really welcome for it. So thank you very much for coming. Hope you have a good rest of your week.